from all, to all, with all, for all, through all. We thank the gods of creation. We thank the ancestors. We thank the forces of nature. And we thank the earth. We thank them for their direction, their protection, their guidance, for keeping us, showing us, allowing us to know and enjoy life to its fullest, now and later.
Black people who once loved with the slow march of time. Time was ours to hold in the soft, love warm chambers of our hearts. And once we, the Afro mommies and daddies of a sun world, would turn our strands of hair into antennas to tune in the juju madness and syncopated love rhythms of Africa. And we loved with time, and we took the time to love, and with the right time we love, and we love time after time. Will we ever love again? Will we ever love again? Will we really ever love again? Or will we just sit and rot away with the brighter tomorrows in the skag field, rat cluttered halls of our minds?
Black people, what y'all gonna do? Black people, what y'all gonna do?
Will the real black people please stand up?
Jumbo Habari, and welcome once again to Our Story, the program that makes being black positive, relevant, desirable, and true to a lost nation in America. A program that speaks to the historic significance of the original people of the earth. Our Story Network takes pride in setting itself away from other programs that centers on entertainment or rhetorical mumbo-jumbo that misdirects your attention onto other things that causes you to exhaust your resources and renders you brain dead. It is Our Story who talks about commitment to you and your people. It is Our Story that champions the reestablishment of the black genius that once ruled the world. It is Our Story that focuses you in on the rewards of black advocacy, black activism, black involvement, and black power. It is Our Story that encourages survival of the black race and solicits your involvement to that end. Black folks must remember, race first is a call of the day, and we as a people must. I say must take the pledge if we, the people of the original race, expect to survive. As I take the many lessons I have received over the years and reflect upon them by sharing these lessons with my brothers and sisters, I realize the power that we as a people possess for the most part has gone unnoticed. The masses of black folks who have been rendered lost and disenfranchised from the meaning and mission our creators intended for us to embrace is all but depleted. It is because of the mission and meaning of the life of our ancestors that I realize how blessed as black people we really are. What fascinates me are the many gifts I have been granted, which allows me to distribute the information onward to you. As always, that message begins and ends with the importance of blackness. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. Greetings, friends, comrades, family, the inquisitive onlookers, and our beloved viewers. Welcome, welcome, and welcome to Our Story Network. We thank you for being with us this evening, and we trust you will take something of value away with you after the program. That is the aim and goal of Our Story Network, the network that leads the pack in modern-day communications and ancient and modern education. I say ancient and modern education because of the many errors we have found in the descriptions and interpretations of ancient records. The modern revelations by new black scholars have opened the window of discovery that has allowed the truth of knowledge originally disseminated by the black masters of education to flourish once again. This is one of the stumbling blocks that has kept black people from rebuilding their greatness and recapturing their birthright. People, listen to me. As black people, we have a rich heritage and an endless fountain of creativity that can and will pull us up from the ashes like the mythical bird called the phoenix. And why shouldn't black people be as virile as the phoenix? After all, black people have shown the vigor by showing strength and power over the years which endured enslavement. After all, black people have and continue to be associated with the sun. And like the phoenix, black people have obtained new life by rising from the ashes of slavery. So, why are we as black people allowing our flames to be extinguished? I use the term extinguished because 2 weeks ago I traveled to Durham, North Carolina to the People's Assembly. We talked about the assembly somewhat last week, but tonight we have as our guest a leader and activist in the New Orleans community who attended the People's Community that weekend as well. We will get into the discussion in a moment, but what I found at the People's Assembly were hardline activists who still live in the black movement of the past. These leaders are the past jogged my memory back to the days and places when black liberation was king. At one of the tables, I found this Martin Luther King Jr. study guide, which brought back the memories of activist days in my youth. This sparked the notion that black folks in the black movement were more serious about liberation than we find the black people today. Can you visualize? Black people back then were producing and teaching study guides and course outlines they created on black study programs outside of educational institutions. That means blackness was being disseminated to the educational institutions from the streets up. It is a shame that we as inheritors, successors to the black liberation movement of the 60s, and we have allowed the ball to drop and act as if there was never a black liberation movement ever in America. As we thumb through the study guides, we see a course outline that energized learning about black people. We find required reading, tests, and vehicles of applied learning that built minds and bodies of the black race. Building blocks we don't see today in either our neighborhoods or our institutions of learning. What we had then shames what we call black liberation movements today. But is this the case? For the second time since May 1st, 2008, no peace, no work holiday. This statement of fact is 10 years between campaigns. Not like this speaks to why the Black liberation movement has not been as successful as the campaigns of the 60s and 70s, or does it? Then I came upon Study and Struggle for Black Liberation Movements of the 1980s textbook. This 64-page manual on building a fighting black student movement in the 1980s was more than solid proof that the Black liberation movement has slipped into darkness by comparing the current day movements with yesterday's movements. Let me read a short excerpt from the manual, and I quote, "This pamphlet, Building a Fighting Black Student Movement, is needed because as the new upsurge among black students swells, a top-down reformist leadership will not suffice. We need a bottoms-up progressive leadership within the movement that can fight against our past and present errors and mistakes. Among these errors were some made by forces who entered the movement among black students with get-rich-quick schemes, ripping off the real fighters among both youth, and then they abandoned the movement among black students, leaving it to careerists and reactionaries who leached on it," end of quote. This is found on page 6 of the textbook. 38 years ago, our fate was etched in stone. So the question becomes, why? If we could see it then, could we not find a way out of this sealed fate we are in today? The answer: the forces that brought in the anti-black movements were far too entrenched with money to buy the death and destruction of the Black liberation movement. This is why black folks fighting today fight from the valley trying to reach the mountaintop. Tonight, we have with us our guest, Malcolm Suber, noted activist, advocate, and historical scholar who also attended the People's Assembly for Black Liberation. Before we get into the People's Assembly and the Black Liberation Movement, I want to talk briefly about the harassments black activists and advocates go through. Malcolm, who is known recently for Take 'em Down movement, referring to the Confederate monuments, has been targeted by white supremacists who thought the disguise of Facebook says things thinking they are safe from being identified. Let me read this so you can get an understanding of what I mean. This is coming off of the WWL-TV's Facebook website or site. Mayor Cantrell says she's still weighing recommendations of committee that suggest places where statues of Davis, Lee, and Beauregard should go. Take 'em Down, NOLA calls for public hearings on future of the monuments. Bradley Golan Sr. says, "Oh no, not the statues again. I thought they were gone and melted into something useful." Richard Grant says, "Malcolm Suber needs to be taken out and strung up on a good Louisiana live oak limb." Now, our esteemed investigators investigated Richard Gregory Grant, found that Richard Gregory Grant is an employee at the Fort Polk Museum in Fort Polk, Louisiana. He works at the museum as a specialist at the Department of the Army, and it goes on to give more information about his personal life. There was a letter sent to the Fort Polk which says, "Please view Mr. Grant's comments below with regards to the black man Malcolm Suber, behind Take 'Em Down NOLA, the organization spearheading Confederate statue removal in New Orleans. I will be reaching out to his employer tomorrow, and I hope you will too. Richard Gregory Grant has called for the lynching of Mr. Malcolm Suber. The news story is on Facebook on WWL's TV's page. Since he's employed by you, I would love to know if you condone such speech. If you need screenshots, I'll be happy to provide them, as I have provided to the local news outlets already. Await your response. Then we received the response. Sir, thank you for reaching out to us. The Joint Readiness Training Center in Fort Polk does not in any way condone the alleged statements. Those sentiments do not reflect our Army values or the diversity which makes our formation the world's best Army. This incident is currently under investigation. Now, with the Trump years and all of the foolishness and madness that Trump creates and causes, we just yesterday had to deal with Roseanne and her foolishness.
Right.
We get this on a constant basis for those who are out in the forefront for all of us. And when we get a chance, we need to bring this to the light and let the world know that we will not allow our leaders and our leadership to be put in a position where they are fearful for any actions they decide to take on our behalf. So I wanted to share that with them, and I hope you didn't mind, Malcolm, but I thought it was necessary because people don't realize the kind of dedication and work that the leaders put in for the movement that has assisted and aided everyone across the board. So with that, Malcolm, I want to welcome you to our story this evening. I want to thank you for your service to the community, and I would like to talk about what it is that we witnessed 2 weeks ago in Durham, North Carolina. Brother Malcolm.
Okay. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks again for sharing with your audience the threats. But as I was telling you the other day, this has been a constant in my life. And I have basically chosen to ignore these kind of messages that are just shots in the dark from people who aren't anywhere near New Orleans to carry out these threats. But I think given the time that we live in, we have to really examine who and what they stand for, because given the atmosphere that's created by Donald Trump and people of his ilk, they are emboldened. They believe that they can do anything to us and get away with it. And I think that certainly we know that the black liberation struggle is under attack and remains under attack. So we went to Durham for this nationally called meeting, and basically I've been working with a number of anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist forces in the black liberation struggle over for the past several years. And those of us who are actually remnants, as you would say, of the 60s and 70s, we've been in the revolutionary movement since that time. We have felt the necessity to try and pull together a united front of revolutionary-minded forces that can consult with one another, assist one another, but most importantly, share the history. Because if we don't tell our own story, somebody else will tell it, and that's a very important aspect. So this weekend, several weekends ago in Durham, was basically people from organizations in North Carolina, Virginia, D.C., Boston, Chicago, Florida, Atlanta, and New Orleans, who have touched each other over the years, have common experience. And all of us recognize that what is necessary is for there to be a revival of the Black liberation struggle that was, of course, attacked by the right-wing J. Edgar Hoover and COINTELPRO program back in the 70s and 80s. They introduced crack cocaine. They have jailed many of our most outstanding leaders. We have plenty of political prisoners in the gulags of America. And all of this is part of the assault that has been against the Black liberation struggle. And because of that, our movement is weakened. On top of that, of course, we've had a whole cadre of puppets, Uncle Toms, Aunt Jemimas, that have been trained by the imperialist ruling class to be buffers and to be puppets to carry out their programs to derail the Black liberation struggle. So this is an attempt to revive revolutionary struggle among our people and to really raise the barrier, raise the baton, get people to rally around a course of study that really sums up what has been our experience, what happened to the high tide of the Black liberation struggle was 1968, 50 years ago. Cities burned. People responded to the assassination of Dr. King. People responded to the attacks on the Black Panther Party. But all of that was co-opted. And we had substitution of revolutionary leadership with clearly reformist and counter-revolutionary leadership. You had first you had Jesse Jackson and Operation Push. Then you had Al Sharpton and the National Action Network, two other people who've done more damage to our movement than anybody because they have actually worked as firefighters for the ruling class. When black people burn, they come in and douse the movement, tell us that we need to go down a different path. And so we are trying to, in that meeting, try to work out what do we need to do to expand that small hub of people and to really build a countrywide organization of black revolutionaries that can gain the attention of the black masses. Too much of our struggle has been co-opted by, of course, NGOs, 501c3 organizations. That money has dictates to people what they do.
Exactly.
And as long as we are dictated to, as they say, he who pays the fiddler calls the tune.
That's right.
And until we develop our own resources and understand that nobody's going to give us or pay for our freedom struggle, we've got to pay for it ourselves. These are issues that we have to solve and resolve, as well as sum up what happened. How did we get to where we are? And the reason, my summation of how we got to where we are is that there was a definite attack on our movement. People were jailed, people were put in exile. The COINTELPRO pitted one group against the other. There was fights within the Black Panther Party, the East Coast Panthers versus the West Coast Panthers. Other groups were just infiltrated And so the war that was waged against the black liberation struggle, we lost.
Yeah.
We lost. To be frank about it, we lost. And the problem was the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, created a number of avenues and brought a whole cadre of black elected officials, black college presidents, black studies programs. And all of these programs were basically giving people money to cool it and to cool down the anger of the black liberation struggle. And what happened, of course, is this new generation began to observe that things are not right with our people, that we don't have the freedom that we think we have. And after Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown, the youth stood up, started the Black Lives Matter movement. The problem with the Black Lives Matter movement, of course, was that it was not guided by revolutionary theory. These young people have tried to reinvent lessons that we have learned from our past struggles. And because there's this separation between ourselves and these younger people, we have not been the influence that we should be. So that's one of the reasons that we've been trying to build the National Black Assembly, to involve younger people and to especially engage people in revolutionary study, that people need to study our history, understand our history, and really begin to press forward on a revolutionary plane where we can begin to identify our enemies and really take on U.S. imperialism.
Let me ask you, if I could, for a minute, about the Freedom Manifesto.
Okay.
Let's get into that, because this is a statement or position that has been taken. How did this come about? Explain to them how this came about.
This is a result of what was formed 6 years ago, was what we call the Black Left Unity Network. And it was a series of discussions, most of it not face-to-face meetings, but conference calls and exchanges of papers where people were enlisted to draft a program for black liberation, a program based upon the summation of where we have been and where we need to go. And so the publication of this manifesto 2 years ago was seen as a means of trying to engage, especially the people around the Black Lives Matter movement, to engage them in a discussion about what have we learned from our struggle and where do we need to go, program. And so basically it sums up the black liberation struggle, and it tries to outline what are the key struggles that we need to take up over the next period of time to rekindle the revolutionary movement for black power and black liberation. And so that's how that came into being.
So let me ask you this. How did the leadership of the black rights movement, how did they take it?
The Black Lives Matter?
Black Lives Matters group,
well,
how did they take
well,
it?
Black Lives Matter is not an organization. It's a movement created by a number of black women who were active on the internet, and they began to churn out Black Lives Matter, and it was similar to the call for black power.
Mm-hmm.
In 1967, Willie Ricks, Mukasa as we now call him, was in Mississippi firing up the masses for Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael to come. And he began to chant, what we want, black power, what we want, black power. And that quickly made the masses of black people understand that. That's what this whole struggle is about. We need to assert our ability to rule over ourselves. This was a definite call for self-determination. Black Lives Matter is basically in response to the tremendous amount of police murders all across this country. And the youth begin to identify that we have to assert our humanity. We have to let white people know that, no, we're not satisfied with what's going on in this country. We don't think that there's been any real triumphs of the civil rights movement. Yes, we're on these white college campuses. Yes, we've got these professional jobs. But any black person can be blown away at any moment by some racist white policeman. And this system treats that violation of our rights and taking of our life as not being important. And so if whites are saying your lives are not important, we have to insist that our lives are important. And so that's why the Black Lives Matter movement erupted and it caught fire. But there was no resulting national meetings to build anything as there was in the Black Power movement. You know, after the Black Power slogan came out, we had several Black Power conferences all over the country. So everybody who got down with Black Power were at least talking to each other and saying that we should be working together and fighting together. And so definitely the Black Power movement was under the leadership of revolutionary elements. The Black Lives Matter is under the leadership of professional black women who are trying to get some, in my opinion, they're just trying to get some monies from the imperialist powers. If they got some money, they'd be satisfied. And so Black Lives Matter has to be given some meat, be given some real heft by saying that Black Lives Matter has to do with black self-determination, that we must control our own destiny. That has always been our task, to fight for our freedom and liberation. And if we don't do that, then we are missing the boat. And so that was what the pamphlet was designed to try and sum that up for young people and to challenge them to think programmatically what needs to be done. Can we achieve freedom in this country under the capitalist order? And those of us on the black left have rejected capitalism a long time ago and believe that the fight has to be for political power and socialism and communism. And so that is where things lie at this point. So what we're trying to do is build a united front of those people who see themselves as revolutionary, who understand that we're not going to get free by joining some 501c3. We're not going to get free by becoming the left wing of the Democratic Party. We're not going to get free by electing some black man mayor or some black woman mayor. That we're not going to get free until the masses of black people realize that we've got to roll up our sleeves and go to work. And that is where we're at today. And that's where we're going to be until we move off the dime and really begin to expose what's happening.
Let me interrupt you for a minute, my brother. We have a caller that wants to get in on the conversation, and we want to thank our caller and those that will be calling. Appreciate you watching and participating. We ask you to turn the volume of your television all the way down. Talk to us directly in and through the telephone, or else we'll get feedback and we'll have to cut you off. So caller, we appreciate you watching. What is your question or comment?
Greetings. Good evening. Well, great guest, Malcolm Suva, who does outstanding liberation work. I would like you to comment, Mr. Suva, on this assessment. Some see a division in the progressive black movement. Some feel that there's a conflation of the freedom movement that blacks have continued to wage against their inhumane treatment in the LBGT community. there's a contradiction in the aspect of the black progressive movement, particularly those who are involved in the LGBT community, because now some of us are beginning to see an attack on the concept of straight black males. There are several articles and discussions that are being waged on the internet, literally pinpointing out, and these people sit in what is called the black progressive arm, and they are attacking what is called the black straight male and equating the black straight male with a white male who has white privilege. And that part, I want you like to comment on that. And the second part is, in the black progressive community, particularly among the socialist elements, I don't hear criticism of the Arabs who exploit our people, of the Koreans. There just was a news story last week in Atlanta where a young man videotaped a Korean store owner slapping a sister who worked there. And I hear a lot of jumping on the black bourgeoisie, the black bourgeoisie, the black bourgeoisie, but the black bourgeoisie don't own any of these stores and enterprises throughout the black community where blacks are being exploited. And I continue to listen. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks. Well, clearly, part of the struggle with Black Lives Matter has to do with the leadership of that movement not understanding the contradictions and putting what we used to call a secondary contradiction as a primary contradiction. What I'm saying is that a lot of the gay women, lesbian leadership of the Black Lives Matter movement take the position that patriarchy, not capitalism, but patriarchy, is a source of the problems that black women at least face. We reject that infantile understanding and think that most people would agree that we don't get discriminated against, we don't get harassed, we don't get shot because we are men. We get shot because we are African men. We get shot because African men represent a threat to this capitalist society if we can organize ourselves. And so that's critical. Now, in regard to the question of the Arab stores and the Korean stores and the black community and the exploitation that goes on, you know, yes, that happens. And yes, if we were better organized, we would have our own community stores owned by black folks, and black people who live in black communities would support them. But again, I'm not endorsing black people becoming store owners as a solution to our problem of national oppression and problem of us not having freedom. You know, we need to sit down with young people who have an interest in opening businesses and ask them to set up corner grocery stores, small cafes, so that they can gradually move these people out of our neighborhoods. But as long as we don't have people who are who see that as a viable means of making a living, and you know and I know that those people, those Koreans and those Arabs and the others who open these corner stores in the black community, they get there at 6 o'clock in the morning, they work to 8 o'clock at night, 7 days a week.
And we also know that they're selling more than just the goods in the store, too.
Yeah, of course. But what I'm saying is, how many of our people are willing to put in 56?
Those kinds of hours, yeah.
You know, our young people want to work 5 days a week and party on the weekend.
Yeah. We have another caller that I wanted to get to. Caller, are you still with us?
Yes.
All right. Caller, what is your question or comment?
He was talking about Black Lives Matter, and I thought that the Black Lives Matter meant that those ladies were trying to save black men from getting killed, from killing up one another. That's why, and it wasn't but the idea of what he's saying. That's what I thought. I don't know.
All right, well, we're going to let him listen on the TV. We're going to let him respond. Thank you.
Right. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Black Lives Matter is not a unified movement, but certainly the young, the women who have been given the credit of founding Black Lives Matter, and who've been given all of the ink by the ruling class press, they are lesbian, and they believe that the principal contradiction is with black men. On the other hand, the mass understanding of Black Lives Matter is what you just articulated, that black people should care about all of the needless deaths of our people at the hands of the police forces throughout this country. And also an extension of that is that we should care enough about our lives that we will continue our fight for freedom. And that's the vein that we're trying to tap in. That's what we're trying to mine, is the real desire of black people is to be free, to not be exploited, to not be discriminated against, to have the quality of life that everybody else is given. But, you know, we have never been given anything in this country except a hard time.
And plenty of that.
And plenty of that. And so we're not going to get anywhere until we quit fooling ourselves that there's some other means of gaining our freedom other than struggle. Frederick Douglass told us from the 19th century, you know, if there is no there is no struggle without progress. Well, let me get back. Without struggle, there is no progress, right? That there has never been any movement forward unless people struggle. And that is something that we've got to do. And in this struggle, we've got to have allies. We've got to be able to identify who are our friends and who are our enemies. And some of our friends are not people of our own color. We have allies. But we also have people of our color, who are black, who work against our interest. And we've got to be able to distinguish between friends and foe. As they say, we should have no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. But our goal is those who fight with us and fight for our freedom and liberation, we will fight with them and stand beside them as long as they stand beside us.
Okay, well, in understanding that, so I've had a hard time finding where any group that has come into the liberation movement, the black liberation movement, where we have actually benefited from their participation to the extent or in relationship to what they have benefited from. What I'm saying is, it appears to be a one-sided proposition where they come in, they benefit, we may get a few crumbs, but short-lived, we lose those few crumbs that we receive. I use as example the women's liberation movement, who came in and watered down the black liberation movement, who usurped the black liberation movement, and who have made gains that far surpass what the black liberation movement has made. So I'm hard pressed to see how and what benefit we as blacks have gained from their assistance.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with our own leadership. What do we demand? What do we ask for? When we sit down and when you make alliances with people, you have to know you have to define. What are you going to do for me? What am I going to do for you? And to the extent that we have not been jealous of our struggle, have not made sure that we call our own shots in terms of our struggle for freedom and liberation and self-determination, then people will take advantage of you. You know, but if you go into a relationship with your eyes wide open, then if somebody pulls something on you, that's your fault. And I'm saying that many of our elders and many of our people who came before us, because their aim is not to build a revolutionary black movement, but their aim is to assimilate. Their aim is to be like the white folks, to live like the white folks, to have a big fine car and a big fine house, and not worry about the black masses. And I'm cut from a different cloth. I'm a revolutionary, and I will be a revolutionary till the day I die. And my commitment is to fight for the freedom of black people, especially the black working class people who have done all the heavy lifting in building this country and in maintaining this country today. And yet, this country has decided that the black population, especially the black male population, is redundant, no longer necessary. And so they say they got a place for us, and that place is in the prisons.
Exactly.
of this country.
Exactly.
So as my elders would tell me, the last time we had full employment among black men was during the period of slavery. When we were enslaved, there was no complaints about us being lazy and shiftless and all this. But as soon as we were cut loose from the plantation and able to begin to eke out our own way, all of a sudden we were transformed from good, happy laborers into a troublesome prospect out here.
Yeah.
And so we've got to know that that these people don't have a program to help us, so we've got to help ourselves.
We've got another caller. We want to go to the phones. Caller, what is your question or comment?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm sorry, not good afternoon, good evening. I think with the problem with the younger people, and us as a whole, really, I think we bought into greed and individualism. And the younger people, they look at everything with the instant gratification mindset, that they don't realize that this is not a moment, it's a movement. It's going to take struggle, and it's going to take, a long time before anything changes. Now, I'm of the opinion, I think we are just closed ranks, and I'm just for separation. Because we've tried everything else. It's almost like us, beating our head against concrete. But what I will say, things are going to change. We're like in the frying pan right now. And Donald Trump is like the fire underneath the frying pan. And as this fire goes up, and it gets hotter and hotter and hotter, people, you won't have to tell people to move. We won't have any choice but to get up and do what we need to do. And that's my comment. Amen,
sister. I have to agree with you. Amen.
That's a good observation that you made, sister, that, but let's also put the onus on ourselves. We have not trained our children in the traditions that would make them freedom fighters instead of some young hustlers want to be rich. Much of the culture, the hip-hop culture, the so-called hip-hop culture, in fact, they don't even talk about black culture, they talk about hip-hop culture as a universal culture that embraces everybody. And we always talked about the black liberation struggle. And so where we separate ourselves from these hip-hop folk, yes, most of your followers are young white kids. That's who buy hip-hop music. And that's who you're making your money off of. But the question is, since you have the megaphone, why aren't you using that megaphone to advance the struggle of our people towards freedom and liberation? And I agree with you, sister, that I've always been an advocate of the right to self-determination for the black nation in the Black Belt South. I believe black people should rule over themselves because our history shows us that we are not going to be treated equally or fairly under the rule of the white supremacist ruling class. And therefore we need to go out on our own. And so that's something that certainly we should be debating and discussing. And but you don't hear enough of discussion about separating from our master and going on our own.
Let me ask you, Malcolm, because you brought up history, and I wanted to really get into this. The second platform in the Freedom Manifesto states, black history is the fight for freedom. What are they talking about here?
That if you look at the totality of black history, that ours has been a quest to get free. We brought here in chains, kidnapped from our homeland. And ever since we were here, we came here kicking and screaming. We've been continued kicking and screaming, those of us who are conscious, for our freedom and liberation. And so that's what is meant by our black history has been a history of struggle.
You know, it has been interesting to see a resurgence of the movement, whereas here I think we're probably rather active here in New Orleans.
Compared to other cities?
Yeah, I do.
We've got, in fact, I was talking to people about all the stuff that we were doing, and they were just amazed.
Yeah, yeah.
They said, y'all got all that stuff going on?
Yeah.
I say, yeah, we've been struggling, and you know, there's a handful of us, but we've tried to keep the flag flying high and signaling our people what needs to be done. But we need to continue it, and we need to get more people, and especially we need to tap the resources that our people possess. You know, our people spend, the black church raises $1 billion every Sunday. Yeah.
Easy.
Easily. Why can't us liberation fighters raise $1 million a week, you know?
Yeah.
Something that we could use towards improving our conditions and fighting better. And but you know, we've got to develop all aspects of our liberation struggle. We've got to get our young people to be more critical of the junk that is fed to them. And we've got to get more young people who are dedicating their lives to fighting for freedom and liberation. You know, we ain't got much longer. Our generation don't have too much longer on this earth. And you know, sometimes I shake my head.
Yeah, who's going to continue?
Who's going to pick up the torch?
Yes, I agree.
And so we've got to begin to train our young people, you know, that history requires you to pick up this torch. Not me personally, you know, don't pick it up for me, pick it up for our people.
Our people, exactly. Hate to cut you off there, Malcolm, but we have the fastest hour in television, believe it or not. And we're going to have to get you back here again soon, because this was a very educational as well as interesting conversation that we had tonight. I'm sure our viewers were well pleased with the conversation that we had tonight. So Malcolm will be inviting you back again. As always, if you ever need us, we're here. Just holler at us and let us know what word you need to get out, and we can do that.
Thank you.
I want to remind our viewers about the book, Our Story, the Original Holocaust. We want to talk about history. We want to talk about some solutions. We want to talk about reasons and rhymes as to why we are in the situation and predicament we're in today. Then this would be a very good start for you to look at what is happening, and it also talks about some of the gains that we have done right here in New Orleans. So our story, The Original Holocaust, is available at the Community Book Center, 2523 Bayou Road. It's also at Wayne's World and Sons, 2255 St. Claude Street. And of course, on the West Bank, Educator's Delight, 301 Holiday Drive, Suite 405. So stop by, pick up a copy. Think you'll be happy that you did. I want to thank our viewers. I want to remind them also that you can find us on YouTube at Our Story TV show, and you can find us on Vimeo at vimeo.com/Our Story. Well, my brothers and sisters, we want to thank you for another marvelous week. We look to see you next week. Stay strong, stay black, but most importantly, stay committed to blackness. Uhuru Sasa Umgawa.
Come on, listen, lift every voice to freedom. Let's manifest. Come on, come on, come on, come on.
Sing a song,
yeah, talk to
full of the faith that the dark past has taught us.
come on.
Sing a song, full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun
Facing the rising sun, come on.
of our new day begun.
It's a new day.
Let us march on
Yeah.
till victory is won. Till victory is
This is
won.
victory music. Come on, I hope you feel it.
Yeah.